Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Western Word Radio, where we discuss issues of relevance to the defense and advancement of Western values and ideals. The zoologist Alfred Kinsey published his seminal examination of American sexual habits in 1948. Titled Sexual Behavior in the American Male, it unleashed a firestorm of controversy, which many have claimed ignited the sexual revolution. His second book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, published just 5 years, made more sensational observations about adultery, sexual depravity, and bestiality. Who was Alfred Kinsey, and what is his legacy to the American people today? That is one among many other questions I will address today to today's guest, Dr. Judith Reisman, author of Sexual Sabotage, How One Mad Scientist Unleashed the Plague of Corruption and Contagion on America, published by WorldNet Daily Books and is available now in hardback. Welcome, Dr. Reisman.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very pleased and happy that you've invited me here today. Thank you.
Wonderful. I want to just begin by quoting from the book, and sets really the context of our discussion today. The books, and we're referring, of course, to the human sexual behavior in the, I think it's the human male. I think I missed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's in the human male. The books launched the so-called sexual revolution, an era of sexual license that brought a booming global trade in electronic pornography, annual international sex trafficking of up to 800,000 women and children, domestic sex trafficking, prostitution stripping in the millions, unprecedented sexual violence against women and children, rampant eroticism in pop culture, high rates of unwed pregnancies, abortion on demand, skyrocketing rates of addiction to sex, pornography, and illicit drugs, failed marriages, widespread impotence, lost careers, financial ruin, sexually transmitted disease, and death. That's quite a catalogue of
yes, it is, isn't it? The point being that ideas have consequences, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about Alfred Kinsey and who he was. You spend at least the first third of the book examining the man himself, and then I want to go into his methodologies and how he came up with his various proclamations about human and American sexuality. So who was he?
Well, Kinsey himself was a sexual psychopath. He had been a sexually disturbed boy since childhood. We found that out from his colleagues, his friends. I was certainly never allowed into the Kinsey research, into the Kinsey Institute, though I tried to get in there. So fortunately, his colleagues and friends have written extensively about him, and they describe the fact that since he was a young boy, he was engaged in compulsive mutilation of his reproductive organs. I'm trying to put that in a nice way that, sort of skips over the children. And normal people don't do that. I mean, they just don't mutilate themselves in the manner in which Kinsey began doing that at an early stage. Now, we have no hard data on why this happened, and the fact that he does fit the profile of an early child sex abuse victim, that is true, but we don't know about why he actually became as disordered as he did. But he went on to do these things, and then to hide his dysfunctions to the extent that he married a woman and was unable to really interact with her, for quite a long time. And but then it turned out he was indeed, they argue, bi or homosexual. I don't particularly care. He was not a normal guy. He engaged in sadistic behavior. His life was spent engaged in activity with other males. He was certainly involved in the sexual torture of at minimum, in his own book, 317 infants and children, but when you look at the data, he's up to about 2,035 that were involved in the tests that he conducted. He was a pornography addict who forced his wife and all of those he hired, who had to be like himself, to engage in pornographic filmmaking in his attic and at Indiana University. He tried to circumcise himself in a bathtub with a knife, was found there as an adult, when he was teaching us all how to behave sexually, by a colleague. He tortured himself to such an extent that he would collapse on the floor at Indiana University from the self-inflicted activities that he engaged in. So no, this was not a normal guy, and he imposed his sexual perversions and pain on the rest of society through his power, backed by the Rockefeller Foundation and Indiana University, through his power over the mass media and over the depiction of him that was promoted everywhere. He was on the cover of Time magazine, Collier's. He was on every newspaper in the United States, and always described as a straight guy, married with the children, who was even a Republican and that sort of thing. So there was a persona that was created. It was a marketing persona to cover up, indeed, his bizarre and disturbed psychopathologies.
Now, Kinsey was a zoologist and wandered into the issue of human sexuality over the course of his academic career. What inspired him to make the change? When did his experiments and his examinations of human sexuality actually begin?
Well, if you read the Kinsey Institute publicity, which is online, of course, at their website, the claim always is that there was just no real information about sex out there, and all these 1940s and 30s kids were coming into the schoolroom, and they thought that if you kiss each other, you get pregnant, is what he said. And so everybody was so ignorant that Kinsey decided he had to find out more about human sexuality. And the way he would find out, since he said there was no research, these were all lies, by the way. You might have had some bizarre little girl who thought that if you kissed, you got pregnant. But I can assure you, by 1935, people knew how you got pregnant for the most part. And they tried to avoid it with great diligence, even though some didn't manage when they were not married. I mean, people got married; they knew how to do that. But anyway, so Kinsey claimed the only way to find out and to educate the world and his students about sex was for him to go asking everybody sex questions and to find out what they were. He said to ask them what they were doing sexually, which he proceeded to try to do, and that involved him forcing young girls at Indiana University to answer the most private sexual questions that anybody would be arrested for today. And in fact, he was so angry that the Dean of Women's Studies was not forcing these co-eds to sit in the private room with this bizarre man and tell him the size of their body parts. Sort of thing, that he threatened the Dean of Women's Studies to the extent that she was fearful of physical assault from him. So this was not a normal guy, and they don't mention that part of it, of course, on the Kinsey Institute website, because they're very busy trying to defend him and cover up the crimes of which he committed, and the crimes of which the Kinsey Institute are still liable.
Well, how did he get funding for this kind of research? Why was it given, Indiana University given such pride of place and such protection? It was seen that beginning in the 1940s, the early 1940s, this kind of research, America was still a very, very conservative place, and this kind of research would have been looked at as a little bit askance. How did Kinsey manage to win such approval for his research?
Well, yeah, that's a very, very important question. You know, just recently, October 4th, President Obama and Hillary Clinton and Sebelius, I never know how to pronounce her name, head of HHS, are all apologizing, to Guatemala for the fact that scientists and doctors went to Guatemala to conduct sex experiments really there on people, and that was giving them syphilis in order to find out if penicillin would cure it. So we were dealing at that time, and Tuskegee had just was one of the ongoing projects as well, and so there was a lot of very unscrupulous activity taking place here, not just across the water in Germany and in Japan. And so, Kinsey, however, Americans, yeah, you were completely right, would have looked really askance had they known what was taking place as a part of Kinsey's behavior, Kinsey's so-called sex research. But he was able to cover that with the protection of the Rockefeller Foundation and the protection of the new president of the Indiana University, who was a man named Herman Wells, who himself was a highly questionable male, bachelor with lots of young men, young boys, sort of things, helping him out, in his house. And so there were a lot of protective mechanisms put into place. The Rockefeller Foundation had massive influence in the media, and the media covered Kinsey uniformly as a noble enterpriser who was just trying to help Americans know the truth about the World War II generation. And so these lies, the treason, really it was treason, committed libel and slander against the people who had just come back from World War II, just won the war overseas, just defeated the enemy. They were traumatized, the returning vets. They were trying to build their lives. They came home having no idea that the attacks overseas that they had survived and that their colleagues and their friends had not survived, that those attacks were taking place right here, right now, and there was nothing, in fact, that they could do about that, because our mass media, everywhere they turned, told us that we were hypocrites and liars, that they were hypocrites and liars, and that all of this sexual activity was taking place, and that these Judeo-Christian Christian-type people were just trying to deny it. So the attack at home was a mass media attack that was controlled by the Rockefeller funding and money, and that protected Kinsey from any real scrutiny, and that laid the path for sex education in the schools. That was a Kinsey sex education based, and the corruption of the entire society. The me generation was brought up believing their parents were liars and hypocrites, and that they had been sexually active and promiscuous, and that there was no downside to it. That was the important part, because Kinsey insisted that he had the data, the statistics that proved that the greatest generation were engaged in massive promiscuity, but there was no downside. There was no STD problem, no sexually transmitted disease problem, really. He claimed he interviewed 4,441 women, and nobody really had been raped. I mean, so the lies perpetrated on the society were believed because the society was reasonably healthy and naive about the results of this wild, promiscuous life that Kinsey would advocate and that we would begin to practice.
Well, let's talk about his methodologies and how he conducted his research. Your book is filled, at least in the first 50 or 60 pages, with descriptions of orgies and of brutality and sexual torture that most people aren't aware of. with Kinsey, how Kinsey conducted himself and obtained his research.
Right. Yeah. I know that's, of course, very deliberate. When the mass media is controlled by a special interest group, as it has been for many, many years post World War II, when New York Times, the Washington Post, the publications of record, when they hide the truth, the people can't know the truth. And what we were looking at in terms of methodology is outrageous. Kinsey claimed that his book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, reflected the activity of average American men, even, if you will, upscale sort of college men. The fact is that, talking about methodology, Kinsey actually threw out 75% of his research population, just lied. Nobody ever knew that. But he did. He just disposed of it, and we have no idea who he disposed of, but they were certainly not normal. Because, in fact, the majority, that is 69% of the research that he conducted, was conducted directly during World War II, when American men were not able and could not legally ever give information of any kind to Kinsey. They were forbidden to speak about anything personal or non-personal at that time because we were involved in World War II. And so here this man, Kinsey, did the bulk of his research during World War II. Well, the only people here in the United States that he could interview, should he choose to do so, would have been active, radical homosexuals who were out as homosexuals, because they wouldn't be allowed into the Army at the time at all, prison inmates, criminals who were not allowed. And as a matter of fact, the military accepted criminals into the service during World War II if they were not violent and if they were not abusers of children, that sort of thing. So Kinsey interviewed the most vile people that existed in the males that existed in the United States at that time, and he just redefined them as average American guys. G.I. Joe. The rapist in cell 295 in Detroit became G.I. Joe, and those data then were put together along with other data that he concocted to define the American male. And therefore, when he wrote that American men, 95%, he said, of American men were really guilty of sex crimes, in fact, in his research, that wasn't inaccurate in a way. And had he titled this book Sexual Behavior in the Aberrant American Male, Sexual Behavior in the Criminal American Male, or the Dysfunctional American Male, that would have been fine, and we would have known what not to do. But he didn't do so. This is not only was Kinsey betraying the American male who was out there fighting and dying to preserve his freedom. Not only did he betray them, but he himself, of course, was a draft dodger. He could have gotten away with that in terms of his own, being a father, although many fathers served. But he also got draft deferments for his lovers who were part of his research project. One of his lovers was Wardell Pomeroy. He became his co-author. Another one was Clyde Martin, who he seduced and who became a co-author. He only kept around him very sexy, cute, young, Anglo-American males. He refused to have any women interviewing people. He refused to have any Jews, any blacks, any minorities. He was a eugenicist. He argued that 10% of the population, and it wasn't his population, that 10% of the population should be sterilized because they were, not the right kind of people. So this was a highly dysfunctional man. Again, you'll not find this on the Kinsey Institute website, and nor will you find this reported in the film that was made to glorify him, starring Liam Neeson. So his methodology was there was no methodology it was not scientific. He wrote in his own book that you should force your subjects. He used the word force your subjects to give the answers that you believe that they should give. I mean, this was ludicrous when you begin to look at what he did. It was absolutely outrageous, and the fact that he was never called to account for it tells you of the power of the Rockefeller Foundation at the university level, at the mass media level, and across every area of influence.
Now, his subjects for examination were the members of the World War II generation, which Tom Brokaw refers to as the Great Generation. You actually invoke that term as well. And you spend the first part of the book talking about the Great Generation and giving examples of, how chastity and sexual abstinence were very much treasured aspects of life, American life. And I'm wondering if there were countervailing scientific studies, scientists who objected to Kinsey's field of inquiry, who felt that he got it wrong and had done studies of their own which contradicted what he had found.
Well, yes, very much so. As a matter of fact, Abraham Maslow, who was a very famous scientist at the time, and other scientists who were quite well known at the time, they contradicted Kinsey very strongly and identified his research as completely slanted, including his research on women, certainly. But they never got the media exposure. Nobody ever really read about their countervening data. That's, again, the power of mass media, the fear of universities of losing that Rockefeller funding that they were all getting to a great extent, and other philanthropies that were involved and that agreed with Rockefeller. And one of the most important studies, actually, that was conducted and was released as an examination of the sexual behavior of 200 college males, that was conducted by Kinsey's colleagues, people who believed in him, who agreed with him, who that was the Ensengerbers or whatever their names were. I've forgotten. It's in the book. And they were a highly promiscuous couple. And they produced a book reporting on the sexual conduct of 200 in 1960 of 200 college males. And they were appalled because they had to say that most college guys treasured their virginity. They as did Hugh Hefner, by the way. Hugh Hefner was a virgin, too, in college. And they were appalled by this because they were a highly promiscuous couple. They ended up doing a big erotic museum, by the way, in I think they were from Holland or something, or the Netherlands. I've forgotten. I have it in there. And they were appalled to say that not only were girls treasuring their virginity in college, and this was already published in 1960, but actually the boys did too. They treasured their sexual virginity. They were going to give themselves to their wives. So yeah, we would have a very low rate of venereal disease amongst these people because they were not copulating, with everybody in the world either. And so yeah, but that never reached the public. The public never learned these things. What the public got was Hugh Hefner, who read Kinsey as a college student, and then he said, heck, he found out that his fiancée had lost her virginity, and so he said, well, that's it, I'm going to be Kinsey's pamphleteer, and he kicks off the pornography revolution with Playboy magazine, and everything in it follows Kinsey's model. All the things that Hefner would recommend, everything that spun off into the pornography industry, would be following Kinsey's model.
Now, I'm a student of the 50s and 60s generation. I spent many, many years reading books and examining what happened in the 50s, this sudden shift in values and attitudes that really has given us the world we have today. But the question I have for you is, wouldn't the sexual revolution happen anyway? with the advent of television, mass communications, the development of the pill, wouldn't these things have brought on the sexual revolution even without Kinsey's revelations?
No, actually, the answer to that one is no. In fact, if you're talking about a public that maintained its Judeo-Christian belief system, which is what they did, this was the belief system that won World War II. Then no, the answer to that is absolutely not. It had to be a belief system that was altered, and what Kinsey did was come round back. That's the way everybody does those things if they're going to deceive. He got a small cadre of believers, people who were like him. You always have those elitists. I mean, every nation and every time has had the pansexual elitists. Those were the people, in France that wanted to diddle everything they could get hold of. I mean, and they're always your upper, your elite, your affluent, either the royalty or whatever. But the average American person did not believe that at all. And in fact, when we're looking at even the pill, I mean, so what he did is he collected around him this cadre of lawyers and judges that would help him create what was called the American Law, what was created, and that was the American Law Institute Model Penal Code, a whole new legal code that was based on Kinsey's frauds. Now, that legal code, the American public had no idea this was going on, and that legal code was manipulated, was brought into every legislature, based on Kinsey's frauds. And the legislators then, believing that the American male was engaged in this sexual promiscuity, that the female was too, that all these laws that we had in place, we had laws in place. People have no idea. In 1948, it was a felony in California to seduce a female. I mean, it had nothing to do with consent. She could say, yes, he would say to her, I want you to be the mother of my babies. We're not married, but we will be. And she'd say, oh, that sounds so nice, yeah. And so she'd consent. Well, that didn't matter. Seduction was against the law in almost all states in the Union in 1948. So, and rape was punished very severely. Half the states in the Union offered the death penalty for rape, and you didn't have to cut off a girl's arms, to get that. And the same thing for statutory rape and so forth. And cohabitation was against the law. Fornication was against the law. That was because it was a common law, and the common law in the United States of America was there to protect women. Was there to protect women and children. And our males who passed the common law believed that women and children had to be protected because women were highly vulnerable to seduction, highly vulnerable to the guy saying, you're the prettiest thing that ever happened. I just think I want to love you, and I just can't wait. So all those laws were in place not to protect men, but to protect women and children and the family. And that was a belief system that the American male had accepted, had imbibed. So even had the pill made it through all of the hoops that would have been put in its place, even that, in all probability, without the statistical falsehood, lies, crimes that claimed all these things, no, I don't think we could have had that sexual revolution. I think we would have had children of the me generation who were brought up by the greatest generation, who then believed in their parents and then continued on with that belief system into the next generations.
Well, I've been reading recently a number of biographies of Hollywood celebrities during the heyday of the studios. Cary Grant, Tony Curtis, Hedy Lamarr, and a variety of others. And the perspective I get there about sexuality is that in the film industry, in the movie industry at least, sexuality was taken very lightly. In other words, having sex, with between actors and between actors and actresses wasn't regarded as a very, well, it was just taken for granted that they did that, and that infidelity and breaking marriage vows. And this is, of course, at odds with the values portrayed in the movies, in those very movies.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is the point. I mean, even because these are your elitists. I mean, these have always done those things and felt that they were able to do those things. Of course, they didn't all do those things. I mean, Jimmy Stewart is of that period as well, and so was Charlton Heston. And so there even some of those guys were not in agreement with that behavior, but the elitists always did it. But even if they did it, they didn't dare portray themselves in that manner to the American public. The American public was a standard public. They were your Judeo-Christian belief system. They're the ones who won the war, and they're the ones who were raising their children and not knowing what to do and blaming themselves when those children ended up being part of that, promiscuous, let's go to San Francisco and do drugs and have sex. Well, you can't raise children to believe that their parents are hypocrites, or their children will reject the values of those parents. And that's exactly what happened. And I think your point is well taken. And that is that in the Hollywood world, the elitist world, just like in other aspects of this country, these kinds of behaviors were accepted. But even if you look at them, a lot of the Hollywood type people who are engaged in these bizarre behaviors, I mean, even they were not nearly as promiscuous as the accepted view of the San Francisco kids later on. I mean, they would have maybe 10 partners. We're talking now about, no end of hooking up. I mean, this is not what we're talking about today, even now. Hello?
Hello? Oh, you there?
Did I lose you?
No, you didn't lose me. I'm here. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I want to talk about that hooking up culture in just a minute, because it's one of the very, very disturbing phenomenon to me. But I'm interested now in the beginnings of the secular revolution and rock and roll, the advent of rock and roll, and how did that aid the sexual revolution and aid Kinsey in this idea of deconstructing sexual roles and sexuality in general?
Right. Well, remember that these are guys who grew up in the Kinsey era. The rock and roll generation grew up. They are the me generation, in fact, okay? And so their music would reflect the rebellion and the anger and the angst that they would have as the children of that generation, having been told that their parents were proper married couple, that they didn't sleep around and so forth. This generation would have grown up as the Kinsey clones, and they put into their music their anger and their angst at the betrayal that they felt that they had experienced. Who feels more betrayed than a child who finds out, allegedly, that mom and dad are liars and hypocrites and they've been having sex with everybody in the world? Children never want to hear about their parents having sex with each other, much less, to know that their parents were having sex with other people. You talk to any kid, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to think that their parents had sex. Now, mind you, they all know about sex and how it happened. They are here to prove it. But they don't want to hear about it. They certainly don't want to hear the moans and groans in the next room. You don't do those things to your children. And if, in effect, the rock and roll generation were forced to, in a sense, hear the moans and groans of not only their parents in the next room, but to envision those moans and groans actually reflecting parents, including moms, right? Very scary thing. Moms having bizarre sex contact with all kinds of other people. So the trauma that inflicted on the children of the greatest generation is unparalleled, absolutely unparalleled, and untouched by our psychologists and our psychiatrists out there who all just want to ignore what actually transpired and the impact that would have had on the children of these people, of our heroes, the children of our heroes and our warriors.
Well, we take it back of this journey down through the 60s and 70s. It really became a part of the liberation movement. And when I talk about liberation, it's of course not just sexual liberation, but political liberation from the very Judeo-Christian values and traditions which had anchored the society. And in Diana West, we had spoken earlier about Diana West before the interview. Diana West, who's written The Death of Grown Up, has posited the idea that it was a permanent infantilism or permanent adolescence that we have fallen into, that even grown adults now ape adolescent behaviors. Is that also, in your mind, a legacy of Alfred Kinsey?
Well, surely. I mean, look, if you got the Judeo-Christian belief system and you replace it with a pansexual belief system, which is really what happened, all right? You got you got the common law. You change the laws. You say that you can do anything you want to do. Ye shall be as gods, you know? Yeah. Then what you've produced is a juvenile system, absolutely, and they will move and sway with every twist and turn, with every fashion that's put in front of them. They're never fulfilled. People have to believe in their the parental structure. They have to believe in, and the church and the movies. Everything begins to reflect that pansexual belief system, which Kinsey emanated, the pansexual belief system. That and again, I can't repeat this often enough. There's nothing new about that. I mean, we come out of the mire of a pansexual belief system. The Judeo-Christian system is what civilized society, what gave us a civil society. Otherwise we would all be carrying on, like a bunch of gibbons and whatever, and there would be no society. There would be no civil, safe environment. So as the liberation, quote unquote, occurred, which Kinsey advocated for, that was his whole argument. As the liberation, quote unquote, occurred, then the entire structure of civility and safety would collapse, and self-governance. Of course, you need adults to self-govern. All of our founders made that very clear, that without an adult society, without adults taking responsibility, you lose your self-governance. And when you lose your self-governance, you're going to lose your republic. And that is where we are now. Look, what happens below the belt will determine what happens to the mind and to the heart and to the society itself. If you become a society that has no self-governance below the belt, you become a society that is subject to the whims and to the will of all the rulers, the powers that be, those who have the power, and that would not reflect the common good, the common welfare. And that's where we are right now. So, yeah, what you do to your society sexually will be what happens to that society in terms of civil government.
As a corollary to the previous question, I want to just examine something else with you. And we recently here in Los Angeles, as our guest, Wesley Smith, who wrote a book titled "A Rat is a Pig, as a Dog, as a Boy," which is an expose of the animal rights liberation groups and the animal rights groups in general, and how they have basically a focus now an attack on human exceptionalism. and the idea that human beings are unique on this planet and have a primacy that over other creatures, over other animals and plant life. And I'm wondering whether Kinsey had the same idea that, we're just animals like any other animals. We're not exceptional. We're not anything special. And we, like animals, should allow our impulses to govern our conduct and behavior. An attack on, you've already said it's an attack on Judeo-Christian values, but I'm just wondering, did he believe that human beings actually have no uniqueness?
Well, he goes beyond that. At least Darwin, Kinsey wrote his thesis on Darwin, but he wasn't a very good Darwinist, I have to tell you, because Darwin certainly drew a distinction between animals and man, and did certainly hope that the human beings would behave, in upright ways. Now he kind of opened the door to all sorts of problems, but one of his big disciple, of course, was Kinsey, and it's really interesting that Hefner wrote his dissertation on Kinsey. But let's go back. So Kinsey actually believed that human beings were no different than insects. Remember, he's really an entomologist. I mean, his specialty is the gall wasp. That's a small little insect that he would go and collect thousands and thousands of those things, nail their wings to little pieces of paper, and measure the wing spread. And what he said was that analyzing, that studying human sexual behavior, I mean, this guy was really a psychopath, that studying human sexual behavior, he said, should be no different and no more difficult than measuring, he said, the wing spread of an insect, from one end to the other. Well, I was on the Donahue show years ago, and I said that. And I said, but you see, the point is we aren't insects. We really are human beings. And there really is a difference between the measurement of a wing spread and the claim that you can actually measure human sexual emotions and behavior. We're not insects, and so the current effort, remember, to say that we're no different than the pig and we're no different than the dog and that sort of thing. That again, that's a pathology. That's such an insane pathology because, we have really not seen too many civilizations created by dogs and too many civilizations created by pigs, and this civilization in which we live, which allows those scientists to become scientists and allows those psychopaths to write these books claiming that we're no different. Tell me that these individuals cannot even recognize, the world in which they live, cannot recognize the glory that they have been granted, and Kinsey created that concept of us as insects, and Hugh Hefner followed suit by treating human females as animals, and thereby treating the American men who used his material as animals.
Well, let's now talk a little bit about the hooking up culture of today, a phenomenon on college campuses, in high schools, and is portrayed in endless television series for children. This idea that casual sex is a good, is something that's educational, and it's rather part of our growing up process and educational. How did we get there? How did we get to the point where this attack on chastity and abstinence and virginity is outdated and unwanted attributes of a civilized society?
Well, Avi, can I call you Avi?
Yeah, of course.
Hi. Okay. Yeah. Well, obviously, people say that I have hunted Kinsey the same way that that Nazi hunters have hunted Nazis. Yeah, and it's true. I suppose it really is because I think I have found a spore here that bred significant bacteria if you flow over time. Because the whole field, there was no field of human sexuality or human sex education or sexology or anything like that before Kinsey. Kinsey formed that field. The entire field came out of Kinsey's bizarre hatred of human beings, his heterophobia, his fear of the opposite sex, and his own pathologies. So we had a field that was grounded on him. He was the father of the field, and they all admit that. I mean, that's not to be denied. And that field has continued in his wake to believe as he believes. And not only that, but to teach in the schools at the youngest level all human sexuality education, from the PhD, institutional human sexuality education, from the PhD down to the kindergartners who are learning it in the classroom, comes out of the Kinsey frauds. And that's not to be denied at all. So here we are with Planned Parenthood going into the classrooms. That's how I got involved in sex education, 1974. Planned Parenthood printed a brochure that was being handed out to children. These were 16-year-old children, and now it's down to kindergarten. And in this brochure, they said that you should have sex with your friends, plural. And they said, that if you want a virgin to marry, buy one. There are girls who have freely chosen that business. Marriage is the price you'll pay, and you'll get the virgin very temporarily. So the human sexuality field has always followed the psychopathic model of its founder, Alfred Kinsey. And by the way, just recently, the Kinsey Institute just released its new report on orgasms and sex, which was funded by the Trojan manufacturers. So the interlocking relationship between big pornography, big pharmacology, that's, and the Trojan, all this sort of thing, the interlocking relationship between that and big sexology comes all the way down to your kindergartners learning now that they should explore homosexual, heterosexual promiscuity with one another, and the most bizarre forms of dysfunction. These people should be sued. They should absolutely be sued by anybody who gets an STD. These are the folks who are creating the pathologies that are destroying children and destroying society. And one can anticipate that that's going to happen if you have research that used a 2-month-old baby in sexual torture experiments and a 5-month-old baby and a 4-year-old for 24 hours around the clock, claiming that an orgasm was when children had fainted and had convulsions and screamed and cried and were writhing in pain. That's the foundation of human sexuality education today. It has been since 1948, and you can't expect to produce a sane society by teaching children these things. And yes, they will engage in hookups. Little girls are going to send pictures of themselves when they've been reared on pornography. And they want boys to like them, and they want boys to desire them, and they want to nest. Not that they know this, but it's inherent in their biology. And so yes, they'll do whatever it takes to be noticed. And if what it takes to be noticed is to strip and gyrate and engage in destructive behavior that will actually cause them cancer, cause them to have their breasts, mutilated for various reasons, to be big and so forth. If that's what the going media claim is important, that's what they're going to do. And we then become completely complicit and responsible for the destruction of our own children. That is the actual consumption, if you will, of our own young, of our own youth. How bad can that get? And it's getting worse daily.
Now, about halfway through the book, you ask the question, or posit the investigation. Why didn't Kinsey give any attention to the issue of love between human beings? What was it? Why would he have avoided that discussion and the sex act as an expression of love rather than of domination or of power.
Yeah, they're very important. And again, remember, people out there, you're supposed to get that book, Sexual Sabotage. Go to your bookstores, ask for it. I went to a bookstore just recently. They didn't even have it in there, though it's on the list. So please do that for me. That's why I'm trying to talk to you guys out there. The reason that Kinsey would avoid the word love. I mean, it doesn't even appear, nor does the word rape, by the way, really appear in any of his books. He did not recognize the downside of sexual license. He did not recognize rape as existing, really, because he also did not recognize love as existing. He made no distinction between rape and love, and he couldn't. Here's a man who, as we said, was a sexual psychopath who liked to be tortured, who tortured himself, who was a bitter, angry, and vicious man who bullied everyone around him. He did not recognize love because it wasn't in his repertoire. It wasn't in his belief system. And I'll tell you another thing that happens to people who are that vicious and that hurting, because he certainly was hurting. And that is, they don't want other people to have what they don't have. I would say that Kinsey's book was written to destroy love. If he couldn't have it, nobody else could. You hear about the people who say, well, to the woman, if I can't have you, nobody else can. And so they kill and so forth. Well, if this man was unable to love and was unable to experience that unique and powerful sense, and if he, of course, was as totally irreligious as he was, he had no belief in God whatsoever, he was angry at God, furious at God, then he would visit his pain on the world. And to visit his pain on the world meant to destroy any concept of love and its value, because its value is in its uniqueness, its human uniqueness. Human beings have the capacity for love. Very few animals do. There's that vole, a few little animals that do, and once their dopamine is denied them, they don't have that capacity either. So human beings have the capacity to generate out of their bodies, out of their hearts, out of their souls, love for the one unique person. Great poetry has come from that. Great music has come from that. Great literature has been based upon love. Shakespeare writes the most outstanding piece in one of his Psalms on lust and what it does to the human being as a swallowed bait. And that lust itself, once it is given full reign, will destroy everything in its wake and is filled with hatred. He allies lust to hatred and to the urge to destroy, and that is what we're talking about. In love, you don't have lust. You may have passion, but you don't have lust.
I want to ask you now about the Kinsey Institute itself. What does it do? And then the second question is, why hasn't Kinsey come under the microscope? We had a movie which basically was an apotheosis of Kinsey not a few years ago. Was, as you said, with who's the actor? I can't remember the actor's name.
Liam Neeson.
Liam
Neeson,
yeah.
who plays warrior heroes everywhere.
Yeah. So tell us about the Kinsey Institute and how it's carrying on Kinsey's legacy. But why haven't we had more examination of Kinsey as a sexual deconstructionist?
Right. Yeah. Well, in 1981, when I looked at the Kinsey charts and graphs on children, and I saw those children being tortured around the clock, and I read that Kinsey said that he was really involved in this because, he described the convulsions of these children, and he concluded himself that they enjoyed it. I said, that's a sadomasochistic pedophile who writes that, for goodness sakes. Who else says a thing like that? And that was 1981 that I discovered those charts and those graphs, and I went to the British Psychological, well, that was an earlier thing, but I went to the Fifth World Congress of Sexology, and I put up those charts, in front of what I thought was an international body of my, colleagues. And I put those charts up, and I said, these are directly out of Kinsey's book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. We have to have an investigation of that, right? And then afterwards, I realized that internationally, globally, Kinsey has shaped global human sexuality education. People came to me and they said, well, children are sexual from birth, which they learned from Kinsey, and these are all your educators from England, from South Africa, from the Netherlands, from Denmark, from Sweden, from France. Of course, these are your leaders in the field, and they're all telling me that children are sexual from birth, but that consent should be involved in having sex with children, right? And I was completely stunned. I had no idea of the worldwide influence that Kinsey had and of the reliance on his research for people's advancement in academia. And as I pursued this over the years, I realized that Kinsey's research is quoted by everybody. The psychologists, the psychiatrists, the social workers, the lawyers, everybody is educated to believe these frauds. And once educated to believe these frauds, their credibility, the things they have written, the positions that they have taken in a courtroom, much less in front of the court of public opinion, much less in front of children in a classroom, that those positions then are revealing the educator, the lawyer, the doctor to be a fraud themselves. And nobody wants to be, revealed as a fraud, as someone who missed something as obvious as children being tortured in this material. So the next thing I began to understand was that nobody was going to really criticize this Kinsey guy, that the universities are based on these frauds, that the professors stand on these frauds. They will defend these frauds to their dying day. And that not only that, of course, but their grants that are coming out of the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, their grants that are coming from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, those grants, those monies all also are tied to this belief system. So it's a octopus that wraps itself around our education and our mass media and our legal system to such an extent that WorldNet Daily is talking about finally getting another investigation attempted. We attempted, in 1954, a major effort was attempted to investigate the Kinsey research at a congressional level. That research was thwarted in Congress. There was the Reese Committee was told that if they looked at the Kinsey data, they would have all of their other investigations of the Rockefellers and the Fords shut down. So Kinsey was kept under the lock and key. Then in 1995, we attempted another congressional investigation at the federal level. That was thwarted. We are now attempting another investigation, I hope, in the future with this book. We need the public to make itself known in this area, to say we have got to find out the truth. Let's slap an injunction on the Kinsey Institute. They've threatened to destroy all their records if Kinsey is investigated. What they're doing now is under lock and key. We don't know what's going on at the Kinsey Institute. I know that they're getting research turned into them by rapists and mutilators because they are writing to the Kinsey Institute, turning in their quote-unquote histories. The Kinsey Institute hides everything from real scrutiny. They have fought me tooth and nail. They've libeled and slandered, as it says in the song, and they have absolutely controlled all information that has been released, including that film that was produced only because Dr. Laura Schlesinger was calling on her on her fan base to stop the film, to cause them they requested that Liam Neeson stop appearing in it, and so forth.
Judith, we have to, and we've only got a few seconds left.
Sorry.
30 seconds. That's okay. No, I very much enjoyed this interview. Thank you so much. I just want to remind our listeners, the book is Sexual Sabotage, How One Man Scientist Unleashed the Corruption and Contagion on America, and it is written by Judith Reisman. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.